All right, are y'all awake out there? Yeah. What about you? Are you awake? I see you. Don't think I don't see you. Okay, everybody take a few deep breaths. Let it out. I need to hear the sighs, though. Another deep breath in. Let it out. One more. Deep breath in. Let it out. I know it's that time that's a little bit after lunch but before dinner. I will keep you awake. We're going to do it. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was building allies. What's great is that we just heard about social movements and how social movements help bring people together in large numbers so that we can change policy and change what's happening on the ground in our communities. But what do we need to actually build strong movements? That's one of the biggest questions that I usually get. One of the things that really struck me when I was working at People's Grocery was I always had younger white folks from college come to me and say, hey, so I've heard those talks about race and class and gentrification. I know all of that, and what can I do? Honestly, what can I do? Besides just be a hipster coming into your community with my fresh and healthy food that doesn't seem to apply to half the people that live here. I'm talking about complexity. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. But before we get to that, I have a thank you to say, because the food movement helped grow me into the kind of activist that could talk about this with any sort of legitimacy. I started out being very interested in healthy food because of my family, as I'll get into, but being able to participate in the food movement was really just what brought all the pieces together for me. The food movement is a beautiful place. I was a refugee from the environmental movement, and you took me in with open arms. And when I talk about being a refugee from the environmental movement, I want to start with a story. My family. Social change is about families. This entire country is made up of families. And unfortunately, 49 million Americans who live in those families are food insecure. Even more unfortunately, 1 in 4 African American families is food insecure. My people don't know where their next meal is coming from a lot of the time. And when I think about that, I think about the fact that I could get complicated and talk about policy, I could get complicated and talk about theories of change, but at the end of the day, this country is a series of families that make up communities, that make up our society. And strong social movements come from strong relationships. So I'm talking about allies. To build strong relationships, we need allies in the movement so that different types of people can come together to create change together. One of my first allies in the environmental movement was Captain Planet. Y'all know about Captain Planet? Ish. Captain Planet, he's a hero, gonna... You left me hanging. What is going on? Gonna take pollution down to 0. When I was a little kid, that was my joint. I would sit in front of the television, I would see the black kid, the white kid, the Asian kid, the Latino kid, the Indian kid. They were all fighting environmental disaster together. And I thought that's what environmentalism looked like. So I said to my teacher and my friends, I'm gonna be an environmentalist. And my friends said, really? Do you know any black environmentalists? Besides the kid on Captain Planet. And I really had to sit there and think about it because I didn't. And then I found someone. When I thought about who I knew who was actually speaking for the environment and about the environment in a way that I can understand, it was Michael Jackson. It was Heal the World. It was just regular folk talking about the fact that stuff's kind of bad, we need to fix it. So it humanized environmentalism for me. But there was still this issue of environmentalism not being for me, about me, look like me, something I could recognize, which was, in the end, how I became a refugee. Because I was that one black person in the environmental conversations in college, statewide, that one black person who would speak for all black people when I talked about environmentalism. And that was a hard burden to carry, because then I would go to the African Student Union and talk about black power and the needs of our people, and I would forget where I was and not flush the toilet, and then they would be like, why you ain't flushing the toilet? Because the sustainable part of me was over here, was if it's yellow, let it mellow. And the worlds were colliding. They were colliding. It was hard for me. So I needed to figure out a way to bring my two worlds together. I needed to figure out a way for the environmental movement to actually be one movement. And that was where food came in, because food is the gateway to the environment. That's the way most of us experience the environment. We're little babies, we're crawling around in our grandmother's garden, or at least that was me. Food is how you see the soil. It's how you interact with the trees. It's how you interact with the land. And so I wanted to figure out how to help people who wanted to participate in one movement build strong relationships concretely so that they could be allies, so that we could all talk about the soil and food and the environment and transportation and water and all of the things that actually make sustainable communities at once. And through my work at People's Grocery, and even before that, there were some key things that came up. When I talk about movement building in this context, what I'm talking about is holding space and not controlling the outcome. And when I say that, I'm talking about stewardship at its most basic definition. We steward land. We let it grow. We interact with it. We steward people. We let people become who they are with a little bit of push and pull. And we steward communities. When it comes to being a good steward, when it comes to being a good ally, here are some of the things that I learned. Reflect people back to themselves. The light, the beauty, and the darkness. When I was working in People's Grocery, one of the programs we had was the Growing Justice Institute. And that came up because we were coming up with all these good ideas. Yeah, mobile market, drive around, feed people with hip hop music. And then over here, we had the Grub Box, a weekly produce box that actually figured out how to use food stamps way back in the day, which was pretty revolutionary for its time. But then we realized that there were people in West Oakland who had their own ideas about how to build a healthy local food system. And we wanted to support them. And a lot of times, they needed more context or resources or relationships to actually make these enterprises come to fruition. So we supported. We were an ally. Then you have the art of being with instead of doing all the time, right? This is where we talk about privilege. Now, when you're with struggle, really with struggle, it hurts. Privilege is the ability to be with that pain until it gets to be too much, and then walk over here and sleep in the nice bed in the nice home with the trees and the clean air, right? Lack of privilege is having to stay here even when it's too much, and then seeing when you crack. And when one is allowed to empathize with that and stop trying to fix things all the time, it's amazing what we can create. When one builds a relationship first, that relationship is the thing that actually breeds the solution. There's an activist, I'm on the board of Food First in Oakland, California, and there's an activist named Rosalinda Guillen. She's been a farm worker activist for many, many years, and I'm never gonna forget one of the things that she told me about the way that she organizes. She gets a bunch of farm workers in a room together, and they sit and talk about their kids, about life. Hey girl, what'd you cook yesterday? Hey, did you see the Oscars? What's up? And then maybe at some point she'll say, hey, do we want to talk about the organizing stuff at all? And it's a legit question. Do we? And then maybe for half an hour they'll talk strategy. When the other 2 hours of the meeting was building relationship. And they got more done than I had tried to get done for many, many years through more traditional forms of organizing, because it was all built on relationship. Then you have intention versus impact. Sometimes we intend to do really good stuff and the impact of it just ain't so much. And that was when I got those questions from our interns at People's Grocery. Am I a gentrifier? I don't want to be. I want to do good stuff, but I feel like I may be working cross purposes with the goal that I'm trying to come up with. I feel like my impact may not be the intention that I have. And sometimes that's true. But if we're with the problem instead of trying to fix it so fast, that's when those really creative solutions can come up. And that's when we get to the hardest part, which is where I want to kind of wrap up. Responsibility without shame. Taking responsibility when your impact is not what you intended is very hard to do without collapsing into shame. It's one of the things about the food movement that I feel is so revolutionary. Because so many of the white activists that I talk to who have made mistakes sometimes feel that shame and then they don't know what to do. They don't know if they should keep going. Should I apologize? Should I leave? I get that question too. Should I just leave? Should I not work with people of color? And the answer to all of that is, let's sit with it for a second. Who are you and what do you want to do? And if we work together, we can probably figure out a way for you to do what your heart calls you to do without you harming people. But it does require you to not suffer in guilt and then act from that guilt in a way that makes you feel better, but act in a way that's responsible so that it actually is helpful. So what does it take to bring all of this together? What makes it all gel? Celebration. This is a picture of us boogieing down and breaking it down at my wedding. And this feels like a really future-looking kind of moment to me. Because when we are good allies with one another, that's when we can actually create. One of the things that we talk about at Green for All is the ability to protect from harm and create the future at the same time. That's something that we always have to do. And we can create the future when we have hope, when we're laughing, when we're singing, when we actually bring the soul and the spirit and the vibe and the into our work. But if we're always apologizing and sad and damn the man, and it just doesn't feel so inspiring. So we have to protect and create at the same time. That's the definition of being a good ally. I want to be a really good ally. I struggle with it sometimes. But with practice, I can. We all can.